It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, our top story. How Russia fell back from the Ukrainian front line. We meet the soldiers pushing forwards near Bakhmut.
It's the crackle of machine gun in the distance. The Russian positions are not far away from here. We're now entering the area the Ukrainians took from them a few days ago.
We see inside the trenches abandoned by Russian soldiers as the Ukrainian forces tell us they've made an awesome advance. And we're not going away. Rishi Sunak tells President Zelenskyy as he promises more weapons, though not the jets Ukraine seeks. Also tonight, driving prices higher at the pump, the warning to supermarkets over petrol and diesel from the competition watchdog. The military planes flying into the sunset, but we hear why some in the forces say it will leave the UK dangerously exposed. Prince Harry, the hacking case and the witnesses who allege listening in to voicemails was bog standard at the Mirror newspapers. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages in our press preview from 10:30. Hello, very good evening. For months, the battle for Bakhmut has symbolised a grinding stalemate of the war in Ukraine. In recent days, though, that has changed, with Russian forces falling back from the front line near the city. Tonight, we have a report from that front line. Our international correspondent and his team seeing the trenches and foxholes abandoned by President Putin's soldiers. And that on the day that Rishi Sunak told Russia and his guest, Volodymyr Zelenskyy, that the UK isn't going away. Well, the first shelling of Bakhmut took place on May the 17th last year. Since last week, the Ukrainian military has started to push Russian forces back in and around it, their first significant offensive operations since November. Alex Rossi reports from southwest of Bakhmut.
After months of setbacks on the Bakhmut front, they are advancing as the weather improves. We joined the 3rd Brigade, and they wanted to show us how they're forcing the Russians back. The fighting here remains fierce, and the last few hundred meters towards the new front line have to be made on foot, across open grounds.
You can hear in the distance the sound of small arms fire. It's the crackle of machine gun in the distance. The Russian positions are not far away from here. We're now entering the area the Ukrainians took from them a few days ago.
Ні, там далі там. Просто це дивіться, оце звідси туди, оце ділянка, де вони підлазили.
Down here is one of the foxholes that they were in. Inside, you can see Russian clothing, boots, and everything that they left behind when this was cleared out.
These scratches of woodland have been decimated by shrapnel and gunfire. What should be fields of wheat are pockmarked by the constant shelling. This footage from a helmet camera shows how the brigade cleared these areas. Infantry using grenades and storming the positions. Some of the Russians fled, chased away by bullet and shell. Others were captured, but many were killed here in the fighting.
А враховуючи те, як ми просунулись і скільки по всій лінії, скільки було загиблих, це по попереднім даним, то це взагалі чудово.
And as we were leaving, they were still collecting the bodies of Russian soldiers from the battlefields.
Його наші вбили, може його вбило навіть і цей мінометка. У нього дуже много ранень. А так, там багато є просто трупів. Дуже багато. Нам треба їхати, там треба ще багато роботи. Я, на жаль, не... Сідайте, їдь. Давай, ми поїдемо.
The operations here are a prelude to Ukraine's coming counter-offensive. It could start any day now. And at the brigade's headquarters, they scan the landscape for Russian movements. But despite Ukraine's success in recent days, Russia still controls 90% of Bakhmut. They show us a drone live stream of the city, and the damage is horrific. This place is now a smoking ruin. The soldiers here, though, are confident they can win back their country. But any victory will take time.
Of course, we're optimistic. We know what we are doing. We know how we must doing our attack or our defense. We know that in the end, maybe 2, 3, 5 years, I don't know, we will win this war.
When the main counter-offensive comes is still a guessing game, even for the troops on the ground. But they know their time is coming, and they say they are ready. Alex Rossi, Sky News, on the Bakhmut front.
Our international correspondent there on the front line. Well, the setting could hardly have been a greater contrast to the mud and devastation in eastern Ukraine. Rishi Sunak welcomed President Zelenskyy today to Chequers, the 16th century manor house and prime ministerial retreat. There he told Ukraine's leader the UK would continue providing support and that he would work with other countries on providing jets. Our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn, reports from Chequers.
In the country retreat where Winston Churchill spent so much of the war, a welcome for a man now so often compared to him. President Zelenskyy was flown by military helicopter to Chequers for a surprise visit ending a whistle-stop tour of Europe, greeted and honoured by the Prime Minister.
Winston Churchill made many of his famous speeches in World War II from this room. And in the same way today, your leadership, your country's bravery and fortitude are an inspiration to us all.
There was plenty of symbolism and a place steeped in wartime history and some substance, promises of attack drones and more missiles. But President Zelenskyy is warning allies without more support, his military's long-awaited counter-offensive could be delayed.
We really need some more time, not too much.
And there was yet another plea for Ukraine to be sent Western warplanes.
Today we spoke about the jets, very important topic for us, because we can't control the sky. We want to create this jets coalition, and I'm very positive with it. We spoke about it, and I see that in the closest time you will hear some.
While the two leaders were meeting in Moscow, the Kremlin angrily condemned the military package Britain's announced it's giving. Comments that were dismissed by the Prime Minister.
I think it's important for the Kremlin to also know that we're not going away. Right? We are here for the long term. We remain steadfast in wanting to defend Ukraine, not just now to reclaim its rightful territory, but also to ensure that Ukraine has the means to defend itself into the future as well.
Ukraine is still keeping the world guessing about its long-awaited counter-offensive and when it will begin. And the longer that wait goes on, the more doubts will grow about its ability to wage it effectively. From the idyllic beauty of the English countryside, President Zelenskyy flies back to a war-torn country, the promises of Europe's leaders ringing in his ears. Promises he's heard before, but is still no closer to victory. Dominic Waghorn, Sky News at Chequers.
Well, the UK has provided more military aid to Ukraine than any other country bar America, but it's been in stages and Ukraine wants more. And now our security and defence analyst, Professor Michael Clark, explains why.
After months of stalemate, things are starting to happen in this war. Alex Rossi reported on the new phase of this battle for Bakhmut, concentrating in the south, where the Ukrainians are pushing hard to keep the access road open. And like in all battles, it feels pretty complicated and dangerous to those on the ground. And further north, the Ukrainians have also been making some inroads against Russian positions. And for the Russians, the fear must be that they could be encircled behind Bakhmut if they don't rush some reserves both to north and to south to prevent it. But of course, this is only one small section of a battlefront that is potentially over 600 miles long. Now, we don't know where the main Ukrainian punch may come, but the Russians clearly think that it might come in the south because they're building some very big defences, shown here in red. They obviously think that they've got something really important to defend in that southern area. Any Ukrainian offensive is only possible with the help of the West. And the latest figures up to the end of February show over £75 billion worth of aid has been committed. 75 billion. And the UK has given the second most of that total. So there's a lot of it. But it's all come in stages, now and again, dribs and drabs, as some see it, which is less than ideal. The UK has taken a very positive attitude. But just look at the number of individual announcements that we have made. In the 14 months since the war began, there were only 4 months where we didn't make one announcement, often 2, and in one case, even 4 announcements, all in 1 month. And these announcements were all separate announcements of discrete packages of military aid that we intended to give. And the point the Ukrainians keep making is if the West had only committed earlier and more clearly what they were prepared to do, then they, the Ukrainians, would now be in a very different position. However, we are where we are. We think that the Ukrainians have around 12, maybe up to 16 brigades of infantry, mechanised infantry, and most importantly, armour brigades. And the way these elements work together and are used by Ukraine will be the key in the coming months to their success or lack of it. And for all of this, the Ukrainians still say they need Western jets. They feel that air superiority, and they're not wrong about this, will decide who will win in any given battle space. Now, some Western politicians think that Zelenskyy is actually crying wolf over the F-16s. I guess we'll find out pretty soon whether he is or not.
Well, we saw his eyewitness report a little earlier in the programme, and tonight Alex Rossi is in Kramatorsk in eastern Ukraine. Now, Alex, from what you've seen, is Ukraine ready for this big push?
Well, certainly, I think along the Bakhmut line of contact, it stretches for absolutely miles. They are buoyed by the successes. They are limited successes, we should stress, over recent days. But the fighting around Bakhmut has been really the most ferocious of this war. Bakhmut itself is really a symbol for the horror of this conflict, but the fact that they have had success there has lifted morale, it's lifted spirits, because they think they can have breakthroughs elsewhere. They're also buoyed by the fact that they have Western weapons coming into the country. Many of the troops are returning after being trained by Western powers as well, so they think they can do it. And this is important, the fact that they have been able to move forwards here after months of setbacks. But they do also warn that this counter-offensive, it's not going to be a magic bullet. You're unlikely to see a full collapse of the Russian military. There's no sense, really, that Vladimir Putin wants to end this war, and Russia has huge reserves of materiel and troops. So they do say that even if it is successful, this war could still continue, not just for many months, but many years.
Alex, many thanks. Alex Rossi there in Ukraine. State media in Belarus have shown a video tonight after reports that President Putin's closest ally was unwell. The pictures show President Alexander Lukashenko, who had not been seen in public for a week. A photo of the leader was also published by a state news channel. Back here, the sky-high prices for petrol and diesel since the beginning of the war in Ukraine could have been lower, the competition regulator concluded today. It said there was evidence of weakening competition in the market for fuel, driven mainly by the big supermarkets. Our business correspondent Gurpreet Narwan reports.
Everyone is counting the cost, not least motorists, who have been exposed to high oil prices because of the war in Ukraine. But are they paying more than necessary? The competition regulator, the CMA, has accused supermarkets of increasing their margins on fuel at a time when households are feeling the pinch.
We have seen evidence that suggests that this isn't entirely due to factors outside of retailers' control. And in particular, what we've seen is some evidence that at least one retailer has taken an internal decision to increase their margin targets, and that other retailers have become aware of that and may have adjusted their conduct accordingly.
In its investigation, the competition regulator found that supermarket fuel margins have increased from under 4p per litre in 2017 to over 10p per litre in 2022. This is the product of a year-long investigation that still has some time to run. But the competition regulator hasn't had an easy time of it. It accused supermarkets of being uncooperative, saying that they were insufficiently forthcoming with the evidence. So it will now interrogate management, hauling them in for interviews to get to the bottom of what's going on. The supermarkets say their prices remain competitive and that they're trying their best to shield customers from the effects of rampant inflation. But campaign groups are sceptical.
The biggest retailers have a lot to answer, and that's why there's going to be interviews with the CMA coming up. If you go to Northern Ireland, where the supermarkets don't have such a big hold, the price of diesel is far cheaper, and fuel generally is cheaper than the rest of the UK. So something's not working properly.
It's not just fuel prices that have raised eyebrows. With food prices jumping at a rate of almost 20%, the competition regulator is also scanning the aisles for unfair price increases. So far, it's found nothing unreasonable, but it's keeping a close eye on the supermarkets. They will not be able to get away with using inflation as an excuse for profiteering. Gurpreet Narwan, Sky News.
The Defence Secretary insisted today that the military's new transport aircraft fleet outperforms the planes it's replacing after multiple defence sources said the move will leave the UK dangerously exposed. The C-130 aircraft, used most recently in the airlift from Sudan, is being withdrawn from service. Sky Security and Defence Editor Deborah Haynes reports.
As last month's Sudan crisis mounted, the Royal Air Force's transport fleet mobilised. Here, a C-130 Hercules loads up Marines to help with evacuations. The aircraft can also be used by special forces. But it's being retired next month to cut costs, even as security threats grow. This is where the C-130s are based, alongside a replacement fleet of newer, larger and more capable aircraft called the Atlas A400M. Still, the local MP is worried.
There are niche C-130 capabilities that still need to be transferred onto A400. A400 has serviceability and reliability, availability concerns, and even leaving that aside, even if that weren't the case, there are fewer airframes now than there would have been before.
The urgent need to evacuate British nationals from Sudan saw C-130s and A400s flying back and forth from an airbase in Cyprus. The Sky News Data and Forensics Unit identified 3 C-130s involved in the mission. They made 19 sorties and evacuated more than 700 people. 4 A400s seem to have taken part, flying 22 trips and evacuating more than 1,700 people. Internal documents also reveal that as of the 5th of May, just 1 out of 7 of the C-130 fleet was listed as out of action. But 2/3 of the RAF's 21 A400s were unserviceable or unavailable. In just a matter of weeks, these C-130s, as well as the rest of the fleet, will no longer be based here at Brize Norton. Instead, they'll be up for sale to be bought by other countries, given they've still got many more years' worth of flying in them. An RAF source said to me, scrapping the C-130 is probably one of the worst military decisions the UK has made in the post-World War era. Responding to the Sky News report, the Defence Secretary dismissed what he described as tired arguments.
The A400 outperforms the Herc on most types. It's got a longer range, bigger capacity, can land in the same area, in fact can land in shorter distance. The Hercules only accounts for 10% of the fleet, and the overall fleet for lift is now the biggest it's been for 50 years.
But selling the C-130 fleet still inevitably makes the UK's capability to transport troops and rescue civilians smaller. Deborah Haynes, Sky News.
Prince Harry isn't due to give evidence in the High Court hacking trial of Mirror Group newspapers until next month. But a journalist seen as close to the Sussexes made a major claim in the case today. Omid Scobie said that while on work experience at the papers, he heard then-editor Piers Morgan take part in a conversation which made reference to hacked voicemails and calls. Katie Spencer was at the High Court and her report contains flash photography.
First to give evidence in Prince Harry's case against Mirror Group newspapers, Harry and Meghan's biographer and a former journalist at the Sunday Mirror. Dan Evans given a suspended sentence back in 2014 after admitting illegal information gathering at the now defunct News of the World, but a journalist before that at the Sunday Mirror. Hired in 2003 to work for then editor Tina Weaver. In court, he said it was a badly kept secret that he was the designated in-house hacker, using burner phones in her office to keep his work largely out of sight of the newsroom. MGN denies voicemail interception at any of its titles, but in court, Evans said he was doing it and had about a 30% success rate, claiming that when he was at the paper, in his words, it was doing dodgy stuff on every story. When asked by MGN's legal team if that was overstating it, he said no. A lot of stuff had dodgy goings on, insisting it was so bog standard to do something dodgy along the line on a story. The Duke of Sussex will be the star witness in this case, but also in court the author of this book. Journalist Omid Scobie, who when accused by MGN lawyers of having a vested interest in giving evidence, said it would actually make his life more difficult, that he desperately tried to move away from allegations he's friends with the couple and that this link wouldn't help. But he spoke of how, when he started out on work experience at the Mirror's entertainment desk in 2002, he heard its then editor, Piers Morgan, ask how confident the team was in reporting a story about Kylie Minogue and someone she was dating. He said the conversation was they had broken up. There was reference made to voicemails and calls they'd made to each other, and this journalist knew details. Piers seemed reassured by this. Evidence from the Prince's biographer ahead of the royal himself coming to court next month. Mirror Group newspapers insisting its journalists did nothing wrong. Katie Spencer, Sky News.
President Erdogan's 20 years at the top of Turkish politics looks likely to continue. He came out top in the country's elections this weekend, though, with just over 49% of the vote, fell short of being re-elected without a runoff election. Whatever the result, in 2 weeks' time, it will leave a country divided, as our Europe correspondent Adam Parsons now reports from the Turkish capital, Ankara.
President Erdogan started the celebrations early last night. He is close to winning, but he's not there yet. The election campaign will finish with a runoff, but Erdogan will be the clear favourite after taking nearly half the popular vote. He said, "We strongly believe that we will continue to serve our nation for the next 5 years." The runoff will be against Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, who released a short video saying his supporters were all in his heart and that he would fight to the end. But this could be the kingmaker, the nationalist Sinan Oğan, who got more than 5% in the election. That's nearly 3 million votes. He told me he will endorse someone, but he expects a ministerial job in return.
Sayın Kılıçdaroğlu'nun dış politikada çok tecrübesi yok örneğin. Sayın Erdoğan'ın da çok böyle bireysel gidiyor. Bizim olmamız onu dengeler. Onun için elbette ki sonuçta bu şartlarda anlaşırsak hükümetin içinde de yer almak isteriz tabii ki.
This has been a bruising and divisive campaign, and it's got another fortnight to run. This election has uncovered some profound scars in Turkish society. Differences based on, yes, politics, but also culture, social backgrounds, religion, and of course, geography. Whoever wins, and it will probably be President Erdogan, is going to have to decide whether they unite this nation or simply rule it. Certainly people are polarised in their opinions about Erdogan. This election is really a referendum on him.
Allah nasip ederse ikinci turda %53 reis gelecek. Recep Tayyip Erdoğan gelecek %53 ile. Buna ben kalıbımı basarım.
Not sure that Mr. Erdogan will do everything by democratic way.
You think he might cheat?
I think.
Election observers say Erdogan holds an unfair advantage, but their criticism won't really disturb him. The second round is already looming. The president, one of the great survivors of global politics, is the favourite to win again. Adam Parsons, Sky News, Ankara.
There's some sad news coming out of New Zealand tonight. At least 6 people have been killed after a fire broke out at a hostel. Police say a number of people are still believed to be unaccounted for following the fire at the 4-storey building in the capital, Wellington. Officers remain at the scene at Loafers Lodge Hostel on Adelaide Road, where the fire broke out in the early hours of this morning. In 10 days' time, official data is expected to confirm a big rise in net migration into the UK. Today, the Home Secretary said those numbers need to be lower. But the question is, where could the cut come? The largest number of visas granted last year was to students, but official data shows they brought nearly £20 billion of benefit to the country. Our data and forensics correspondent, Tom Cheshire, has this report.
It wasn't a warm welcome from Extinction Rebellion protesters for the Home Secretary. Once they'd been chucked out, Suella Braverman said she wanted to welcome rather fewer legal immigrants.
We need to get overall immigration numbers down. And we mustn't forget how to do things for ourselves.
The Home Secretary was speaking in Westminster. On just the other side of the Thames, Lambeth is home to many of those who make up the biggest source of legal migration, international students. We spoke to 2 who are planning on staying to work in the UK after their studies finish.
It's quite sad because I see so many foreign students doing so much, studying so hard and having such amazing results at university that it would definitely not be the same without them.
I think if it's something that is discouraging for students to come, you'd feel like it's less of a welcoming environment, especially as an immigrant.
After a lull because of the pandemic, visa grants have surged back. Sponsored study visas and visas given to their dependents are the largest chunk, shown in brown. The question is how much of a long-term difference that makes. For example, more than 220,000 people were issued a sponsored study visa in 2011. A decade later, only 13% of them remained in the UK. Fewer than 30,000. And in the meantime, students bring in a huge amount of money to the Treasury. Higher education-related exports, the vast majority of which is international students paying fees in the UK, were worth £19.5 billion in 2021. That's not much less than exports for the entire British pharmaceutical sector last year, and it's even more than aerospace exports, £15.2 billion in 2021. We've been focusing on students because it's such a large part of the total, and it shows some of the complexity. Because usually when we talk about immigration, it's in terms of just a number, and usually for the politicians talking about it, that number is too big. But this touches almost every industry, and it raises the question of what sort of economy do we want the UK to be? The halls of power will have to take into consideration the student halls of Lambeth, and a lot else besides. Tom Cheshire, Sky News, South London.